Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series as I DM my group at my friendly local game store through Out of the Abyss, the Underdark adventure for 5th edition. So, when we left our intrepid party, they had just made it to Neverlight Grove, kind of cottoned on to everything's not. There seem to be a couple different factions among the Myconids, and also had been offered a tour and been kind of been told, hey, by Sovereign Basidia, there's two sovereigns in this Myconid colony, which is unusual, but it's not part of the madness of the Underdark. It's just how it worked out with this colony. One colony joined another, and they were asked to investigate strange circumstances. They had been told, hey, tomorrow you'll meet her, the Great Cedar, the Joy, uh, type thing by Sovereign Philo, who is under Zuktmoy, the demon lord Zuktmoy's influence in the Grove, and Sovereign Basidia, who's resistant to it, along with a few other leaders in the colony. Like, hey, something's not quite right. I don't know if you want to stick around, but if you do stick around, would you mind investigating for us? That's kind of where we left it. We also talked about how do we handle Globagul the Sentient, um, gelatinous cube being in basically an area that's just teeming with fungal life, and the circle of explorers had agreed to kind of take Glob to their mound and keep an eye on Glob. So another note I want to make before we go any further. You'll see I've got glasses on. I normally don't wear my glasses when recording because of the glare, from the computer screens here. But my glasses broke a few days ago, and I went a few days without my glasses. And now that I've got glasses again, I just don't want to take them off. So future videos, I probably won't be wearing my glasses, but bear with me on this one. And if you like, tell me what you think. This is a little departure from me. Um, these are a little sturdier, a little bit more obvious style of glasses than I normally wear. I normally wear glasses that are as frameless as possible and very understated, but I keep wrecking them. The past several pairs over the past several years I've wrecked or they just fall apart. So I went for a sturdier look. So let me know in the comments if you like these glasses or not. So my wife likes them. The lady at the um, glasses shop talked me into them because I have evidently a quote unquote a cool skin tone, whatever that means, even though I've always been told I'm dark complected. But I guess if you can see your veins kind of bluish in your skin, you have a cool skin tone. So you want to have darker glasses, evidently. I don't know. I rolled with it. I said, okay, it sounds good to me. Because to be quite frank, I was in a pretty big hurry and working while I was getting the eye exam. I was literally in the eye exam chair, working remotely at work on a laptop and trying to get all this stuff done. And also work at the same time and make money so I can provide for my family. But anyway, that's a whole nother ballyhoo. So what the party decided to do after they went through their tour of all of the circles and the leaders and how the colony is set up, um, they had been asked to investigate a couple of creatures in the basin by the circle of hunters. Um, and they decided we're not going to mess with that. We're going to go try to find out what's up with the big, deal across this other cavern and this garden of welcome and all this other stuff that we're supposed to go to tomorrow. They wanted to get up there before then on their own, before Philo took them in there. Um, so Rasharu from the Circle of Explorers, this Rasharu is also not under it. Myconids don't have gender. It is a Myconid that is with Sovereign Basidia and is not under the influence of Zuktmoy. Decided, or it had said, hey, if you help us out, then I will guide you when you leave Neverlight Grove. And I think the characters are going to try to go towards Blending Stone, but it revealed that there was escape routes that it had already set up with provisions and stuff all the way, because it's not under the influence of Zuktmoy, but Rasharu is sort of under the influence of the madness in the Underdark, and Rasharu has become paranoid. But in this case, it'll maybe serve the colony well. It's because you're paranoid doesn't mean that nobody's out to get you. Um, I guess, is that how that quote goes? Anyway, so Rasharu also revealed that it could get them to the Garden of Welcome and knew how to get them there. And the party was like, yes, that's what we want to do. So the way I did it, I use Eldith as a multifaceted, multi-purpose NPC. Eldith the dwarf NPC from Gracklestug. She's a shield dwarf scout, supposedly. We've statted her up. We use her when the party is low. Maybe a lot of people haven't come that night for some reason, and there's combat. I'll allow her to get involved in combat. When people show up and they don't have a character but they want to play and kind of check things out, because we play at a store, so sometimes we have people just drop in, pickup game type stuff. We'll let them play Eldith if they don't have a character with them, which they probably don't, because there's very specific character level. I think we're almost at 5th level now. So I use Eldith for foraging. Eldith has been a great NPC, but we had a full group the other night. Everybody was there. So I said, well, when you're trying to talk Globagul into staying behind, because Globagul wants to go investigate and see everything, then the only way that you can get Globagul to do that is if Eldith and Shushar, the Kuatoa, the other NPC, stay behind with Globagul. And I told my group on purpose, the reason I'm doing that is because you have a full party, and you don't need Eldith for your NPC melee combat backup. The group that I DM is very light on NPC or on melee characters. They have a monk, and that monk is about their main melee character. They had a paladin at one time. That paladin is the paladin that charged an adult red dragon at 2nd level and got killed very swiftly. And they have like a lot of they've got a bard, they've got a wizard, they have a cleric, they have a monk, they have a rogue. I think they have 2 rogues now. No, they have a rogue, a ranger, and trying to think what else, and a monk. I think that's the main party now. The size of the group fluctuates between like 6, 10 plus, but right now we're about 6, 7 people playing, maybe 8. And I can't remember all the characters, but they're very light on melee. And I said straight up, I said, Eldith's not coming with you, because Eldith is really the only tank they have. And I said, I can't help it. And I think this came off kind of mean. I didn't mean it that way. I'm just saying, as a DM, I can't control the fact that as a group, as a party, you have decided not to have a main tank character, because there's been new characters introduced, there's been people die and new characters come in, and knowing what the party makeup was, they still have not done any heavy melee characters. So I'm not going to handicap the game for that, or and by handicap I mean like in a golf handicap, where you give people certain points for certain reasons and stuff like that to equalize things. And I'm not always going to use Eldith as their rescue. Now, if they're low on members that night, I'll have Eldith pitch in. But if they're at full strength, I'm not going to have Eldith come along just to be their, basically free gun. So, sometimes I try to be very generous to characters and party members, but sometimes I'm like, that's the choices you made. And I always try to find ways to encourage them to think as a group. And as a group, they have not done efficiently, in my opinion, at making sure they have a well-rounded group. Everybody's like, well, this is the character I want to play, so that's what I'm doing. Now, I've had a couple of people think, hey, do we need this or do we need that? And those discussions have happened. And, good, I'm glad, but they really need a melee character. And I kind of used that the other night as an opportunity to stress that. Anyway, so they were like, oh, we totally get that. That's cool. So off they went to the Garden of Welcome. The Garden of Welcome is awful. I mean, this part of the adventure is like a horror movie, very creepy. In fact, I felt like, and I think the group kind of felt this way too, when we left, when we finished the other night, I felt like I needed to go home and take a shower. You know, soap out my brain because this is a gross one. This is unsettling and disgusting. But anyway, they they sent they started working their way in the Garden of Welcome, and it says that there's this plateau rises higher than the other terraces, screened by a natural fence of soaring zirkwood stalks. Zirkwood, of course, is a type of mushroom in the Underdark, and then muffled murmuring can be heard from atop the plateau. So they sent a couple of characters ahead to stealth and scout it out, and they were doing quite well. They both rolled really well stealth. I think it was the monk and the wizard. The wizard character is a young elf, female elf, and the player plays her very rashly on purpose, saying that she's young and immature and wants to be in the middle of everything. And then, of course, the monk is just a good stealthy kind of melee-ish character who will often uh, stealth ahead. And our rogue is blind. Okay, so the rogue rarely moves forward to scout. Although there are times when listening and that kind of thing comes very handy with the rogue. But the rogue is literally blind. So, grew up in a circus. Very, very interesting character and player. So, they finally get there, and, this murmuring's getting louder, and I'm describing that there's sort of shapes on the ground, and there's a few glowing mushrooms, but in the gloom, there's these sort of shapes in the ground, and as they get closer, they're heads. There's people buried in the ground like an awful lettuce patch or pumpkin patch or something, and there's all these heads, and they're like all there's all these humanoid creatures, races from the Underdark, and they're just like, and they're taken over by fungus, and they're just murmuring, and like, it's just awful. It's just creepy, nasty. So they, and what I did was, it finally says the heads of creatures of a dozen humanoid Underdark races peek from the ground, mold and fungi growing around them. And there's another part to this text box where there is a drow female that was part of the group that was sent there by Elvira to look for the characters, had been, taken to the Garden of Welcome, and, they're planted, and they're being overtaken by fungus. Well, anyway, her name is Zanaya, and she will talk. She's far gone. There's no way to save her, but she'll be like, and talk about Zuktmoy and the Great Cedar, and there's a trap, and save my people, and all this stuff. But I didn't read that at that point. I wanted the whole party there for that. And fortunately, the two party the people that had stealthed ahead were like, freaked out, and they went back and got everybody, and then they came back. And they were trying to figure out what to do, and I had Zanaya start talking to them, and so they're kind of talking to Zanaya. And it says in here on one half that she manages to, or in one portion of this says she manages to stir within her living grave, rising a spider medallion half embedded in the bloated growth that was once her hand. Half her face is rotten and pustulate, a bed for the sprouting of scores of tiny mushrooms. And she's like, talks about the Great Cedar, and there's a trap, and Zuktmoy, and tell my people, save my people, kill me, basically. And one of my characters, there's a tiefling ranger. One of the players said, I want the medallion. I just grabbed for the medallion. And I'm like, really? I was like, what's your alignment again? And they were like, chaotic neutral. I was like, okay. Because if any good aligned creature had done, or character had done that at all, I would have reminded them of their alignment. And if they kept doing it, I'd been like, that's fine. But I'm the type of DM that I like alignment. I think that there are, in D&D, the reason there's alignments, there's actually forces at play behind the scenes, behind those alignments. Alignments are more than just a moral spectrum. And I think that there should be both bonuses and negatives for playing your alignment. So, if somebody keeps breaking their alignment, you eventually start penalizing them. And maybe they lose some temporary stat points, or they start doing things at disadvantage, or they start getting less experience or something. because I just, I like alignment. I always have since way back in the day. But anyway, so they're like chaotic neutral. I was like, all right. And then the other characters were, basically once they got the information they could out of her and realized that she was basically beyond saving, it says any amount of damage kills her, so they killed her as a mercy killing. So, and then there was a lot of discussion of this spider medallion with the one character or the one player, and I said I just kind of had to wing it. I even had to admit, I said there's not a lot of information in the book about it, but you can assume that it's a holy symbol of a priestess of Lolth. So whatever value a holy symbol has in the adventurer's guide is this. I mean, know any other properties about it, but it appears to be a holy symbol. So, and that's where I left it at that. Now, what happens per the adventure is after Zanaya is spoken with and killed, then Yestabrod shows up. And Yestabrod is a mutated, nasty, awful myconid that has been transformed by Lolth into this or not Lolth, Zugtmoy, into this nasty, Jabba the Hutt worm-like awful thing that actually speaks through its mouth, even though the other myconids, talk through rapport spores telepathically. And Yestabrod also brings, it raises 2 drow spore servants, so it points and these spore servants come climbing out of the ground in this awful garden, and then 2 myconid adults will come running in to help, I guess, from Yestabrod's circle. So, 2 myconid adults from the circle of masters emerge from the surrounding growth. So, this turns into a good fight. It was nice to have just a straight up fight in the middle of all the creepiness, because there was more creepiness happening before the end of this session. Yestabrod, the main thing I'll mention here, that the drow spore servants and the myconid adults are, a pretty straightforward fight. The drow spore servants are listed in the appendix for Out of the Abyss. The myconid adults you get out of the DM's guide. And then Yestabrod has its own entry also in an appendix. The interesting thing about Yestabrod was my players have not fought a lot of enemies that have legendary actions and legendary abilities, and Yestabrod did. So even though Yestabrod is only, I think, challenge rating 4, it's quite an interesting fight because of those legendary abilities. So if you play, assuming that you're going to DM, use those legendary actions and resistances and all that to the maximum. I had, and it talks about Yestabrod, if within 5 feet of a corpse or within 5 feet or within 5 feet, the Yestabrod can execute these legendary actions. One is to make corpses explode and do damage within 20 feet, and another one is to absorb hit points from corpses. And I just ruled that they're in the Garden of Welcome, and there's these bodies everywhere, and Yestabrod is just within 5 feet of corpses whenever Yestabrod needs to be. Now, you may do that different, and that's fine, but that's how I did it, because I didn't have it laid out. Oh, there's a corpse here, there's a corpse here, a corpse here, a corpse here. I mean, it's just like he is in a garden of corpses, basically. So, that's how I did it. Thought it was a lot of fun. And one of the abilities that Yestabrod has, and this isn't a legendary ability, it's just an attack that it has, is it releases spores that can infect creatures with the madness of Zugtmoy. So, and it could end up being a fatal disease, and it also gives a madness. So my player, who's a monk, ran up on Yestabrod, and this monk character does this a lot. This monk player will run right up on stuff. It's a monk. Why wouldn't you run right up on stuff? But yet, everyone else is maintaining their distance from Yestabrod and trying to spread out from all these exploding corpses. And the monk ran right up there on Yestabrod, and Yestabrod released these spores, and the monk got infected. But the monk doesn't know yet what happened. They know that he breathed in, or she, the character is a female, breathed in some spores. And I know by rolling that the madness they got was that they're occasionally going to see visions. but the player doesn't know yet. He knows something happened. He knows I rolled. He knows I looked something up, but I'm waiting until next session to get more into that because I love that suspense. He's like, he could obviously tell that something happened. And they're going to check him out. They're aware of what's going on. They people definitely paid attention in the group that something happened here. And I think these infection spores, the player ends up getting 2 or 3 saving throws as he goes. So it's not like suddenly he's just going to die, but it can potentially be fatal. So that's Yesterbrod. Use Yesterbrod's legendary abilities to the maximum, and it will prove a challenging foe. The other thing that I did, and it's interesting because I rolled randomly to pick which character this happened to, and it just happened to be the monk that I later, after I did this, he later contracted the spores from Yesterbrod, and because of that I rolled occasional visions and madness. I wanted, there's a scene in here where it says, if Sereth, that's the drow NPC that's with them from the beginning, is still with the party, he screams in agony as Yesterbrod attacks. The characters can only watch as the drow's head splits open, releasing a cloud of infecting spores and turning him into another drow spore servant that joins the fight. Now, Sereth died at Sloobludop. When Demogorgon was rampaging around, Sereth just got squashed. Because I wanted to, A, lighten the load on the NPCs that I was dealing with, and then B, I wanted to reinforce how dangerous this was as they were running. They were more like in a natural disaster than a monster fight. But what I did was I rolled randomly, and it just happened to land on the player that was playing the monk that later breathes the spores and gets visions, even though they're unrelated. I gave him a vision because there's madness in the Underdark, and there's visions, and there's all this crazy stuff happening. So I gave him a vision, and I said, you realize this is a vision, but you also realize this could have happened, of Sereth being there with him, the party, even though Sereth isn't there anymore, and this clutching his head and exploding and all that. And he's like, huh. And then I said, and you remember that Sereth had these little, kind of infection-looking things on him. And he's like, oh, and everybody got it. So I just thought that was a great reveal. And even though Sereth wasn't with them anymore, I just wanted to have that reveal. So I just kind of spontaneously did that. I think as I was reading through, preparing for that night's adventure, it occurred to me to do that. But or I had the idea or whatever. But anyway, I thought it was a cool moment. And I also said, because they all started pondering it, I said, look, just so you know, I'll give you a heads up. That's not a major significant thing. It was just a moment I wanted to have with you as the DM, because I didn't want them to, get on a wild goose chase or going down a rabbit hole with that. I just thought it was kind of neat. So they fight Yesterbrod. They finally defeat Yesterbrod. They defeat Yesterbrod's, little allies, spore servants and myconid adults. And then they're like, what do we do? And they're like, do we burn all this? Do we do this? Do we do that? Some people wanted to head forward further into that secondary cavern with a huge mushroom tower. One of the players is like, I want to burn that tree down. I said, it's not a tree. I said, it's this massively huge tower. I said, you still are having trouble grasping the scale of it. And then there were some people who wanted to go ahead. Some people wanted to leave immediately and go tell Sovereign Basidia, the good sovereign, what was going on. There was a lot of discussion. There were some people saying, even if we go forward, we've used spells, we've gotten hurt, we at least need a short rest. So what they ended up doing was going back to the circle of explorers, and they found Rasharu, and they kind of pulled Rasharu aside and explained to it, hey, here's what happened. And Rasharu's absolutely baffled, because this is outside of Rasharu's ability to process. So Rasharu's like, hold on. So Rasharu goes and gets Basidia and comes back. Basidia is the sovereign that's the co-leader along with Philo, but Basidia is not under the influence of Zuggtmoy. So before I go any further, I have to admit I was kind of disappointed that they didn't stick around a little further in the Garden of Welcome. Because another thing, after the fight, um, it tells them that they hear uh, some. After the confrontation with Yesterrod, the characters can hear sound and movement from the cavern to the northeast. And it says, read the following box text if the characters investigate. Well, they didn't investigate, but it's a great, great narrative moment. It's this wedding rehearsal thing. Very creepy, very yucky. And I didn't want to force it on the characters, but I really wanted to have this scene if possible. And I really wanted them to have this scene to tell Basidia so Basidia could say, we're getting on to her. Because with the information they had to date, it was enough to like, hey, something's going on, but I don't think it was enough to really get Basidia saying, hey, we got to go. So anyway, the way it worked out, I was very pleased. It worked out this way spontaneously. I didn't force it, which I try not to do. The character, Basidia comes and Rasharu, and they go off to the side so the other Myconids aren't hearing all this and everything. And they explain what happened. And Basidia, like Rasharu, is absolutely baffled. He's like, I don't even. They're like, what? Because the characters are trying to tell him, look, you're dealing with a demon lord. Because they, by the time they fought Yesterbrod and all this other stuff, and the drow, the female drow that was about to die, said, Zuggtmoy, Lady of Decay, and all this stuff. So they're trying to explain to Basidia and Rasharu, you're dealing with a demon lord here, and this is bad news. And it's outside of the context of the experience of Rasharu and Basidia to deal with. They're like, what? I mean, they know something wrong is going on, but they don't get the extent of it. So they said, look, why don't you go back with us to this Garden of Welcome, this horrible thing? And Rasharu and Basidia was like, yes, I think that's a good idea. Even though they'd been reluctant to before, now they're like, hey, things are really serious. We need to see what's going on. So they go to the garden, and Rasharu and Basidia see the, Yesterbrod. They're like, that's Yesterbrod. Something. What the heck? What has happened to Yesterbrod? This is ridiculous. And they see, the bodies moaning and this and that and the other. And they're like, what do we do? They're like, this is really crazy. Well, then I went ahead and said, well, since they're there and they went back and all this stuff, we're going to do this wedding rehearsal. So what happens at that point is 12 bridesmaids of Zuggtmoy and 6 chamberlains of Zuggtmoy come into the garden and start enacting this really blasphemous, creepy, kind of a parody, not a parody, but a kind of a wedding rehearsal, and it's just really creepy. And now, and they're chanting this thing, and there's this. It's just crazy. And it says specifically if the characters don't interfere with them, then they just carry out the ceremony and then basically leave. And fortunately, the players decided not to be murder hobos, and they let this play out. I think it's really creepy, man. There are like spore servants kind of crawl out of the ground and they go grab Zuggtmoy's body. Now, if Zuggtmoy's still alive, then Zuggtmoy does this on its own. But if Zuggtmoy's dead, then these, I think 2 or 3 spore servants, it says if left alone, the thralls enact a mock wedding with the chamberlain and bridesmaids standing in for Aramikos and Zuggtmoy. Now, Aramikos is this huge fungal entity that Zuggtmoy has become aware of and wants to marry it so that Zuggtmoy can become more powerful. Yesterbrod, if alive, assumes the role of priest to preside over the vows. This is very blasphemous and disgusting. If Yesterbrod is dead, 3 spore servants rise from the garden and carry its corpse, moving it like a puppet to play out the part of the priest. At this point of the ceremony, any onlookers experience a vision. And they go through this crazy vision that's basically of Zuggtmoy and all this crazy stuff going on, being, dressed up in a wedding dress and all this stuff. And the vision ends when the ceremony does, after which the characters file solemnly back to Yigmorgus, which is the huge fungus tower, and characters witnessing the wedding rehearsal and the accompanying vision must succeed on a DC 10 Wisdom saving throw or gain 1 level of madness. So I think I had 1 or 2 people fail and got a little madness. Luckily, it wasn't any crazy madness that prolonged things. And I have a couple of characters, a couple of players at madness level 2 now. And at that point, after the vision and the creatures leave, the very blasphemous, disgusting. When you take them through this, make this very disgusting and creepy, and just stress how nasty and awful and wrong this is. But after that, Basidia and Rasharu were like, it's been fun, but we gotta go. We are getting the HE double hockey sticks out of the Neverlight Grove. They realize we're in deep, deep, deep danger here. And, you know, they're like, they basically talk to the players, are like, hey, you could stay or leave, but we're out of here. And that's kind of where things were left at. And the characters, a couple of characters said, can we come with you? And, you know, the Rasharu and Basidia are like, yup, you can, but we're leaving. So next session, it sounds very much like that they're not going to investigate the giant mushroom tower, which is probably to their benefit because it's got a demon lord in it, and you're not going to win that fight. It's just not going to happen. I mean, it'd be an interesting role-playing and narrative experience, but you know, it's not a battle that's set up for the players to go in and just wipe everything out, because there's Zuggtmoy is actually in there. So in Zuggtmoy's own way, is as dangerous as Demogorgon or the other demon lords. So that's basically how things went. There was I had to clarify with my players. 1 or 2 of them asked. Evidently, they're saying, well, after you have 3 levels of madness, you lose your character. Not in Out of the Abyss. You just keep going. You get to level 3, and then if you get another bout of madness or fail another madness saving throw or whatever, then you pick up you have your permanent madness, but you pick up a level 1 madness, and then a level 2 madness, then another level 3 permanent, and it just keeps building up and building up and building up and building up. It doesn't say anywhere in Out of the Abyss that you lose your character. Now, individual DMs could do that to taste, but I'm pretty sure that the intention is not to get characters to level 3 and then they just lose their character because they're so insane. That may be how it is in regular D&D rules, or maybe how it used to be, but that's not how madness is explained in Chapter 2 of Out of the Abyss. So, other than that, you know, that's basically how things went. The characters, it really sounded like they're about to split. I think it would be really interesting to have a session or 2 of the characters traveling with the colony, because it says in the book that if Basidia and other Myconids want to leave, Philo doesn't stop them. He's like, okay, you can leave. And so this sort of, you know, traveling nomadic split off colony of Myconids, I think it would be interesting to have the characters travel with that for a session or 2. And like I said, I think they're going to Blingden Stone. That's what it sounded like they were going to try to do. So that's pretty much what happened this week. Thanks so much for listening. If you have any comments, tips, questions, clarifications, or anything like that, I love to have your comments. This video series is interesting that it has steady views, but it doesn't necessarily get the most views of stuff that I do, but it has a very high engagement rate with comments and likes. So I know people are enjoying this and engaging with it. So feel free to comment. I love to read your comments, and I respond when I can. I try to be pretty responsive. And leave the video a thumbs up on YouTube. That helps me a lot. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. But regardless, thanks so much for watching, and we will catch you next time on Shane Plays.